everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff,
Yes, Joe.
we read an interesting article.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
and
I ran across this and
yes,
thought it was a good idea that this would be something we could talk about.
and the title of the article is How America Got Mean.
Yes.
And it's written by David Brooks, who's a well-known political cultural commentator. Um, and it seemed worth discussing. In We've had many conversations about the virtues like courtesy
Mhm.
and truthfulness. And so it seemed appropriate to evaluate this on for what he says and the evidence and talk about ethics and virtues and
Well,
solutions.
and yeah, what does he mean by mean?
Exactly.
So, right. Then so I don't have the whole article in front of me. I took out a few excerpts that I thought actually are many of the things that we have addressed.
Yes. I
And,
think you're
and
forgetting something, though.
I I'm forgetting something.
You're forgetting something.
The only thing I'm forgetting, and I haven't forgotten, I just wasn't sure we were at that point yet. But
Oh, definitely at that point.
all right, then I will ask you, sir, what are you drinking?
Oh, I have
You say, I'd totally forgotten. This is
totally
something
forgot. I
I do
happen to
every
have
single
here.
time.
This is a 2023 Cabernet Franc Rosé, and it's actually from Michigan.
Oh,
And I was quite surprised because my experience with Michigan wines has not been altogether remarkable.
hmm.
And this is quite delightful. Nice chilled wine on a warm spring day.
I mean, living here, we know that we have a wine region, so to speak, or a part of Michigan that's famous for its wine, for its vineyards.
Yes, but I
To
tended to
Michiganders,
what's that?
to Michigan people, we
Yes,
know where to go for wine.
I have found them often to be a little too sweet for my taste.
Oh, well, I tend
Um,
to like sweet, but I wonder, where I was going was I wonder if every state has their wine area. Maybe not Nevada, but you know what I mean? That at a certain tier in this country, does every state have their wine? Their
that's an interesting question. I think we're more familiar with some states where the production's more pronounced, like Oregon
yeah.
and California. But there are we went to a couple of wineries in Temecula, which is very hot and very dry,
Hmm.
Temecula, California. And the the wine can be quite good because grapes grown under challenging conditions are often better
Okay.
for
Har-
wine. Yeah.
Okay.
So
It's interesting.
and what do you have this evening?
I have a Rebel cask strength bourbon whiskey. Speaking of regions, this is straight Kentucky bourbon whiskey, 120 proof. So I'm going easy on it.
Wow.
Yeah, I bought it with a special purpose in mind. That purpose is served, and now I can just drink it.
No. I think that did you have a particular cocktail in mind for it or
When I bought it, no, I bought it for the experience of 120 proof. Every once in a while, I like my whiskey to fight back. So this is a contender.
well there certainly are some cocktails where you want to start with a higher proof because the dilution of other ingredients will cause it to
Well,
if it's not substantial to begin with, it won't stand up to it. So
if you have a recommendation for a high octane bourbon, I would be happy for that knowledge.
okay,
So
I'll see
in the
what I can find.
meantime,
So
here's
yeah. Hmm.
and it's quite tasty, but at 120 proof, it's got a little heat on the
Oh
back
yeah.
end.
Yeah.
And I like that from time to time. So,
Good.
right.
All
So,
right.
so how did America get mean?
How America got mean.
Well, yeah, it was
Yeah.
rephrased. But
Yes. So he does, he starts by stating some statistics. People who don't have close friends went up. People who've never married went up. People who have the percentage of students who say they have persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. Um, so his first question is, why are Americans sad? And the second one is, why are they mean? And by phrasing the questions, by putting them in that order, he is connecting them. I mean, that's implicit in the way he's presenting them. That sadness is coming out as meanness. Um, and then
well,
he,
sadness, I could say, as a form of dissatisfaction.
yes. And he then goes on to talk about hate crimes going up, murder rates, social trust being lower, and rates of giving to charity are lower. And he talks about technology, as in social media,
Yep.
sociology, people's not participating in community, demography, it being more a country being more diverse,
Yes.
which is I think indicating that that's part of the story is potentially a problem, and the economy in levels of economic inequality and insecurity have left people afraid, alienated, and pessimistic, is what he's saying.
Right. Well, the demography story, he specifically talks about a white dominated nation has
Yes.
become much more diverse. And that's causing a certain segment of the population to be panicked.
Right.
Okay. So it's not the fact that it's the diversity isn't what's causing the problem. It's people's fear of diversity that's causing the problem.
Yes, but it ignores the fact that when it it was absolutely white dominated, white majority country, then well, there was also a level of dissatisfaction. It
Yeah,
just wasn't among the white people.
of course. Well, or at least for that reason. They
Yes,
had other reasons to be
yes.
people can always find something to be dissatisfied about. So,
But then he goes on to say, because of sadness, because of all these other influences, people are no longer educated in how to behave with kindness and consideration, and people give license to their selfishness.
yes.
And
Yes.
he goes on to talk about morality.
And we have talked about how those what you decide your definition for morality is, and what your definitions for ethics is, and what your
Yes,
definition for courtesy are. There's there's a lot of room to debate just within that. You know, your morality.
well,
Usually, people
yeah,
talk about their morality. They talk about some form, some structure that defines their morality.
yes. And as we've said before, um, humans evolved to be communal, to live in
Yes,
societies because that was a survival benefit.
right,
And the consequence of societies is that they have to develop to continue. They have and thrive. They have to develop a code of ethics governing how people interact with each other.
right,
And these often got the power of religion behind them and were called morality rather than ethics, which are actually private. The workable definition here, ethics governing how we interact with other people, and morality, decisions we make that only influence ourselves. You know, do you cheat
right,
at solitaire? Is
right.
a question of
Do you
morality. Do
return
you
the
right,
shopping cart?
right. Which is, I think, a great test of,
Oh
but
yeah,
that I think is not just morality. I think that's ethical to do that. I think it's a test also.
Yes, I think that, and a lot of these are reflections of your level of empathy.
Yes, exactly.
So,
So I think that the the biggest problem with his article is that he starts with the conclusion. It's called circular reasoning. He doesn't say the title of his article is not is America meaner? It's it's how
right.
America got mean. And so he starts with the conclusion and then goes on to prove it. Well, because he's not a social scientist, he's not writing a paper, he's writing an opinion piece.
Yeah,
And
sure.
so he starts with the conclusion and then attempts to prove that. Um, um,
Well, at least he lists things that support his thesis, right? That America has gotten mean.
yes,
So, and I don't know, my purpose for bringing this to you and wanting to talk about this isn't about critiquing his article so much, but many of the things that he talks about are things that we talk about.
that's true.
Um, Virtues, one of the excerpts I pulled out of here was 1788. Noah Webster wrote, "The virtues of men are of more consequence to society than their abilities. And for this reason, the heart should be cultivated with more assiduity than the head."
Yes. Um, by the heart, though, it means compassion and
Yes,
empathy and
correct.
not
Not just emotion.
not
No,
simply emotional decision making, and
correct.
which is important, an important distinction. Um, and there's another one where a schoolmaster in England who wrote that the purpose of his in 1930, the purpose of his institution was to turn out young men who were acceptable at a dance and invaluable in a shipwreck.
Yes, I had that as a, I pulled that out as well. I thought that was a great, great quote.
And which reminds me of our discussion of like Heinlein's rules and other such things like other such codes like um,
Well,
the
there's
man
Doc,
in front.
we've done a bunch of those, right? We did
Yes,
Doc
Doc
Savage
Savage,
Code,
and yes,
and the Wild West Code, and we've
yes,
several of these things. But I love that quote in that it's acceptable at a dance, which means you are a gentleman. You can observe the courtesies. You understand, what it is to interact in a social setting without upsetting people or having to be the center of attention all the time.
yes,
Right? That is being acceptable at a dance. But being invaluable in a shipwreck means that in a crisis, you can keep your head and you can take the lead and you can accomplish necessary goals with focus.
yes. So it's both your understanding of courtesies and your ability to be dispassionate in
Mm-hmm.
an emergency situation. So I thought that was also good. I think that what and again, you're right. It's not about critiquing Brooks. That was really the spark for this conversation.
Yeah.
But he does use those quotes to talk about the necessity of moral education and and community, the necessity of
Mm-hmm.
community. Um, I think that it's true that there's more social isolation based on evidence, but it's true also that other types of communities are replacing the church, which was the
Yes.
premise of a community. As church attendance has declined, people find other communities, other organizations, that you can rely on other people for support in those organizations. And they're not necessarily religiously based.
And most of the kind of organizations you're talking about, I think, they're not the kind where, well, uh, when we were an agrarian society, we required every community needed to be surrounded by a certain amount of land
Hmm.
just to support itself.
Yes.
So communities got were almost by necessity somewhat isolated, even right up until the Industrial Revolution, when the migration to urban environments started happening. Um, your church was the center of the community because it's where everybody the building large enough for everyone to gather in.
Hmm.
So, and there were moral lessons taught. There was also a lot of uh, distrust of the other implanted.
Yes.
So, but you knew that you had to get along with everyone there, and if you weren't, you were some kind of misanthrope, right? If you didn't go to church, you were distrusted, and you were looked sideways at in your community because you weren't part of the community. We see this uh, uh, witches, right?
Yeah.
Were in later half of the Renaissance were like, well, they didn't live in a community. They lived by themselves. They wandered the woods alone as women, and they must be doing something nefarious, or else they'd be at church,
Right.
right? So, like I said, that's the sort of implanting of distrust of the other. And I have my own views about why church did that, or why the church did, implanted those thoughts, because there was one person in charge of the church, and that
And
person could control the whole community.
yes. And that which also led to problems. And that the idea that there was a moral code that everyone adhered to, I think was a problem when morality and ethics were conflated and the the force of a deity was put behind people following a set of rules that
Yes.
that sometimes work to accrue power to the religious institution rather than to help the people. So,
Well, my
and it also, the church also enforced social hierarchies.
oh yeah,
Their
absolutely.
religion better than others, some, races better than others, men better than women. It was all kinds of social hierarchies. And so religion was not simply always a force for good.
I have my own. I am certainly not a socioanthropologist, but my theory, for whatever it's worth, is that religion, the worshiping of some greater power, or the recognition that some power had some effect on the lives of individual peoples on Earth, started out somebody who was probably the smartest guy in the cave,
Hmm.
figured out we need a way to keep the strongest person, the strongest individual from just dominating everybody. So I need somebody stronger than them. Ah, a god. So the god says that your behavior is unacceptable and he will smite you down, or you won't get your reward in heaven, or you're going to go to this bad place if you don't behave and treat everybody with a certain amount of respect. So the smart guy in the cave figured out, if I can control this guy that way, and get everybody behind me and say, yeah, yeah, that's right, that's what a god is will do to you. So stop being bad. I think that's how religion honestly started. And then, but as everybody started believing in a god or gods or whatever, it they that smart guy realized, well, wait a minute, now I'm in control. Now I have the power, not the strongest guy. The smartest guy, me, has the power. And he wanted to keep that power. And his children decided we can have that power. But we need strong people to enforce that power against people who don't believe in the same God we do. Because if they don't believe in the same God we do, we don't have the power.
Okay, I think that um, I agree with you. You're not a social anthropologist, but
I mean, that's
I
a super simplistic view of religion
yes,
and how it works.
but I think the point of what of the point of the question um, is, and putting it as a question rather than a conclusion, are people meaner? Are people less courteous? Are people less generous? Are people further from living according to the chivalric virtues than they were? Um, I think certainly there's evidence, empirical evidence that um, rude, outrageous behavior that used to be completely unacceptable now is. And the simplest evidence is that um, simple things that would have completely disqualified someone for being a political candidate now are excused.
Right.
And excused often by some of the people who claim to be extremely religious.
Yeah. The most moral people.
Yes. So I think that's certainly empirically evident. Um, I think that there's certainly evidence that on social media, this is something I remember you said once about an exchange on social media, or it was actually via email, but the same applies.
Mhm.
That someone was saying something via their keyboard that
Right.
they wouldn't say to someone's face in a bar because they'd get punched.
Right.
And I think that that barrier, that safety behind the keyboard, I think has enabled bad behavior online. I think the effect of that, though, is that for some people, it normalized that kind of rude, mean interaction with people online, and they carried that over into their personal lives,
Well, yeah.
particularly when they're part of a group,
Well, and
because
that's the
that
thing about
mob
social media.
mentality, that group mentality thing
And that's
is,
one thing that social media has fed. Right now, I can
yes,
log into a bulletin board or you know, join a group or whatever. And now here's a whole bunch of people who agree with me and are also saying outrageous, rude things against the same, this is they hate the same people I hate.
right.
And there's thousands of them. I can't be too wrong if there's this many people that have the same stupid delusions that I do. But I
Yeah.
think there are other historical things in this country in particular where we have this, we recognize, you and I recognize the need for community and ethics and being able to exist as a social organism. But in this country, we have this very strong streak of independent, we revere the independent pioneer, right? That the person who is self-sufficient and self-reliant. We have put a lot of stock in that in this country. So this leads us, I think, in some ways to I don't care what you think. I'm my own man or I'm my own person. And we see that in social media all the time, that
Yes.
I don't care what you think. You've got no control over me. I can do what I want. That's my power. Leave me alone. So,
Well, even to the point, I remember uh, it was a stunning conversation to me. I was having online with someone. I said, well, here are multiple peer-reviewed studies showing this. These are the conclusions, and therefore, here. And their response was, peer-reviewed studies are the worst. You can't trust them. Bunch of overeducated eggheads. They don't know anything,
right.
essentially. They were saying, I said, well, then we have no basis for conversation. We can't. It's like Senator Moynihan said many years ago, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. You aren't entitled to your own facts.
But it's this kind of my my opinion is worth every bit that your knowledge acquired over decades is
Yeah.
no
And
better than my opinion. This is what leads to flat earther.
yes, who are still out there, surprisingly.
And I
Um,
think they're growing in number.
yeah.
The common sense can overrule knowledge of complicated systems.
Yes. I was, this was a few years ago, I was teaching an undergraduate class and used, I said something about the dinosaurs, and evidence. I was talking about evidence and stuff. And one um, student said, well, my family doesn't believe in dinosaurs. So doesn't believe they existed or doesn't believe said they existed, but they didn't make it on the ark and it was only, 9,000 years ago. And so I said, well, you know, factually that's incorrect. It's easy. There's plenty of evidence, you know. And she said, yeah, they're crazy. But I don't think we went to the moon. She's and I said,
She
well,
offered that.
yes. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. If I presented you with evidence showing you that the technology to fake the moon landing didn't exist, that there's evidence based on you can see things that are on the moon, there's a lot of evidence of it. Would you accept that evidence? She said, no. I said, well, then we don't have a basis for a conversation here. And
And your
used that
parents, your parents taught you well.
I used that as an illustration to say, to talk, because I was talking about evidence, fact, conclusions versus opinions, because I wanted them to be sure that in what their analyses, what they wrote, they were stating conclusions, not simply opinions.
Right.
Um, so I think that there are a couple of reasons that people think that that people are more mean or that there is a decline, and it's biased exposure to information and biased memory for information
Mhm.
are things. Um, so people may think that society at large is meaner or less moral, according or to whatever their standards definition of morality are. But they don't think that that's true among their friends or family or community.
Well, yeah,
It's always the other.
yeah,
And that's enforced by not only social media, but their selective exposure. And that's something actually that social media does. That if you like one sort of thing, it starts feeding you more of that sort of thing.
yeah,
It
right.
filters content based on what you like. And so um biased
Right.
selective information to start with.
Yeah, the algorithms distill your bias into your feed.
Yes.
Um, So right, and so I think we were talking just before we started that. So while and another article that you found that was kind of the counterpoint to that was a more statistical approach to what have we gotten meaner? Do people think we've gotten meaner?
Yeah, it was
And
actually a peer-reviewed study about
right, and
yeah.
the idea that they went back generations, what they could find as far as surveys, and their sort of conclusion was that well, every generation has thought it's so much worse now than the previous generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
That this is a recurring theme. Um, and in fact, uh, speaking of statistics, violent crime has steadily gone down for 30 years
Yes.
in this country. Anyway,
And
um,
I think the some of the people will point to blips to say
yeah,
that that's the same way that there's a dumbass senator who brought a snowball into the Senate saying, "What global warming?" You
yeah,
know, that's ridiculous. Um, Concerns about crime have gone up, but violent crime has actually gone down,
right.
and quite a bit. There was a really interesting study that connected that it proposed that the reduction in violent crime was based on two factors: legalized abortion, for one, and removing lead from gasoline.
Hmm.
Because leaded gasoline put lead in the atmosphere that children breathed and affected their development and made crime more likely. There was also lead paint and all
Yeah, I
sorts
was saying
of
not just
stuff.
eating meat.
No. But
Hmm.
violent crime, US violent property crime rates have plunged since the 1990s, regardless of the data source.
Right. Yeah. So
Um,
across the board, every
yes.
credible study has shown that.
But
Yes.
Americans tend to believe crime is up nationally, but not locally.
Right.
Well, they
Right.
believe it's up locally, but not as much, even
Yeah.
though it's down. And I think I'm reminded of both Orwell and Huxley in both 1984 and Brave New World. And Huxley said that Orwell said that the truth would be hidden from the people.
It will be
And
obscure.
Huxley said that the truth would be out there, but it would be
Right.
hidden in a cacophony of irrelevancy. And I think Huxley was more correct. People say that you have all the information in the world at your fingertips. Yeah, but trying
Well,
to find it, people believe I gotten student papers where, they'll Google something and the first thing that comes up, they'll cite as a source. I said, it's not a credible source. Just because it's on the internet doesn't make it
that's
correct.
yeah, that's kind of a joke now, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's on the internet. It's got to be true.
Yeah.
And just like you used to say, I mean, just like when we were kids, was it? Well, it's in the newspaper. It's got to be true.
Yeah.
That was a
But
joke then, and as
even
much.
even I've read it was an interesting article. I have to find it again, but it was a comparison of the same, and you can find these are several have been done. Comparison of the same story as reported in different news outlets,
Hmm.
and you take away different conclusions based
Absolutely.
on that by how it's written. And I think
Yeah.
that's a problem too.
And what's the time frame? Just like recently?
Oh, even recently, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, but
because
even going back, I think the first time I saw that it was 40 years ago.
okay,
It was
and,
with the advent of some of the um it was after the removal of the fairness doctrine and the rise of so-called advocacy journalism.
well, I mean, and there's always been such a thing as biased journalism.
Yeah.
It's always existed in this country.
Yeah.
Somebody owns a newspaper, they set the editorial policy, and it biases their reporting. And some of it is just, we're not going to report on that because it throws our candidate in a bad light or whatever. So that's always kind of existed, but there was always also like the fairness doctrine wasn't a law necessarily.
It was a regulation.
It was a regulate, yeah, but it had no real enforcement. There was no way to
Oh yeah,
really
yeah, yeah. It did licensing.
FCC licensing, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was, but and we, and since I was thrown out, the FCC doesn't really license news agencies anymore.
Well, and I've seen this before. Somebody presenting themselves in a situation with a camera and a microphone, saying, here, I'm talking to you about this. Well, you're not a journalist. Well, what's your definition of journalist? Well,
I've got a blog. I'm a journalist.
right. Max Headroom, if anybody remembers that. The term for killing a story is spiking a story.
Yes.
Because there was they don't exist anymore really much because they were dangerous. It's just a base with a metal spike coming out of it. And people would put receipts or papers or other stuff on it. And so if it was a story, it wouldn't you spike it and put it on the spike. Dangerous. I wonder how many people impaled themselves on that.
Well, it was I mean, Steve Martin did a gag in one of his movies with that.
Oh, did he?
And it's slamming the desk because he's angry, and there's a spike on there, and
yeah,
and he just has to pull it out.
So I think that the if people were perfectly courteous and compassionate and truthful and demonstrated fortitude and all the other virtues, we wouldn't really have much to talk about, would we?
True enough.
So,
and if they were innate if they were innate in our nature, we wouldn't have to strive for them.
Well, I think that is a question, though. Are people naturally inclined to be good to each other, or not? There's certainly innate personality traits that people have, but someone who is born without empathy is a sociopath, and that's considered an aberration, or psychopath. It's considered an aberration if you absolutely lack the ability to have empathy for other people. And as we've said, empathy is the foundation of a lot of these virtues, and also a fundamental premise of across religions. That which is hateful to you, do not do to another person, in one way of wording it, but it's been worded the same idea in many ways.
In some ways, what that is here's a rule for someone who doesn't have empathy.
Yes.
Turn it on yourself and ask yourself, would I like this? No. Well, then I shouldn't do it. Because it's not, well, it would be bad for that person and I would feel bad. No, he would feel bad because you have to, making it a rule, making the golden rule is really saying you need to analyze this against this metric before you decide to do something or not do something, right? If we all had empathy, we wouldn't need a golden rule.
Yeah, there were years ago, I was in our martial sport, in our organization. I was talking to some people who had violated the rules as they are for our large group activities, large group martial sport activities. And I was trying to explain to them, and they were confused. I said, look, It's really simple. All the rules come down to one thing. Don't be a dick. And they
Right.
looked at me and they looked at each other and looked at me and went, oh, yeah, we can do that. Like, apparently nobody ever explained it that directly or simply before. They didn't know the reason for the rules. They were just, as far as they were concerned, arbitrary rules. Why shouldn't I do this? Well, because it's a dick move
Yeah.
to do that.
Right.
You wouldn't
And
like it if
every
somebody did it to you.
yeah.
So,
Right. And everybody else here, except you, apparently understands that they don't want to do this thing because it
yeah,
would be a dick move.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
So while we're talking about empathy here, I want to pull out something that was in this article that I thought was an interesting I never heard before. Um, Something conceived by Wilhelm von Humboldt, the term Bildung, which is a weird little word, but it roughly means spiritual formation. And this was something that was used in universities around the world. Gave professors complete freedom to put moral development at the center of a university's mission.
um, hmm,
And you brought up the headmaster of the Stowe School,
yeah.
the acceptable to dance and vow and shipwreck. So those two are kind of related. They're not directly linked, but they're related.
Well, because being invaluable in a shipwreck was considered part of moral development. It's not just kindness and generosity and going to church. It was also being dependable, being brave, those were considered part of the morality of that age. Being strong, being dependable, being
For
trustworthy,
men.
being for men.
For
Yes,
men.
yes.
Um, yes.
Oh
Then
my
I
God, there's a football player who just gave a commencement speech
oh yeah, I saw a clip of this. It's
where it was a rant about essentially, women need to give up your, he was addressing graduates at a
right.
commencement speech, and more women actually go to college and graduate from college now than men. And he was saying, essentially, give up this idea of career and promotion and go be a housewife because that's the best thing for you.
Yeah, he was citing some example of someone who'd given up the true joy of her life
Yeah.
by getting a job instead of being a wife and mother, which was yeah, it's so outdated as to be laughable.
Yeah. But it was, and that's the idea of that's it's not ethical to impose your personal moral code on other people. He could believe that, and he could choose to marry someone, apparently he did,
Right.
who believes as he does. And they could do that, and they might be kind and generous and not break laws and not hurt people and raise, you know, healthy, well-adjusted children, although that's questionable. But for him to then say, all you other people should be doing this too, that's unethical because
Yes.
that's not recognizing everyone else's um, ability to do what they choose to do and still interact. He broke that code of ethical interaction by trying to dictate to people what they
Right.
should do.
He was judgmental. He became
Yes,
judgmental.
yes. I think, well, judgmental in not in a good way.
Well, yeah, of course.
You
I
know,
mean, judging everything by a very strict personal
yes,
standard.
yes. rather than a communal standard.
Right. Or being accepting of difference as long as it doesn't, you know, hurt anybody.
Right.
That's what it really comes down to, right? That and uh, Aleister Crowley said, and not holding him up as a good moral example, but I always remember the quote, and people don't use the whole quote, like a lot of they truncate the
Yeah.
quote, but people always quote him as saying, "Do what thou the whole." He said
If it
something.
hurts none, do what thou
That's the
wilt.
thing, but that and it hurt no one. If it hurts no one,
Yes.
it's often left out.
Yeah.
He says, um, the all of good. I don't remember now what it was exactly, but it's the like you were saying. The whole of the law is to do unto others. You know,
Yeah.
to
That.
right. And he was said, and he has been misquoted as saying, "The whole of the law is to do as thou wilt." Without that very crucial,
And
as
it
long
hurts
as it
none.
harms no one.
Yes. Exactly.
And that is kind of the sort of ethical liberty that Americans, at least historically, have unwittingly tried to um, describe.
Yes. My
I should be able to do anything I want.
Yeah, no. The your right to swing your arm stops where my nose begins. You can't cry fire in a crowded theater.
Right. But
My
all of those things
argument,
those things demonstrably can harm people.
yes,
So we write laws against them.
yes. My argument to um, some religious people who talk about very strictly defined gender roles, societal roles, has been this, that the creator endowed people, individuals, with abilities, rational abilities, talents, creative abilities. If we are then to say, no, this is a test to say, I'm giving you these abilities, but you're not to use them. You're to, you're simply to follow these rules. It That's malicious, and it's a variation on something that um, um, astronomer. Um, oh, that
Do
was
we get a
interesting.
like?
Yeah, I snapped my fingers and I
Huh.
got that was interesting. Um, um, what's his name? Cosmos. Carl Sagan.
Carl Sagan, yeah.
Um, he said he was in a debate with a creationist, and he said, "You would have me believe that all the evidence, our intellect, human intellect, all the evidence of fossils and our scientific ability and advancement, all of that is a lie. That all this evidence was planted there as a test for us." He said that is evidence of malicious God, and I don't believe that God is malicious. And that's what Carl Sagan said. And I think that's, what I said is just a variation on that. Consequently, if we have abilities, not only would it be malicious for us to then be expected not to use them, I think it's our duty to use our abilities, to use our intellect, our talents, and our compassion, and our kindness, and all of those abilities. It's our obligation to do the most with those that we can.
Well, we've talked about science, technology, advancement, progress, whatever you want to call it, must be informed by ethics and compassion. And
Yes.
you know,
Yep.
just because you can do something may not be the best reason to do it.
Yes. Like AI.
We could have a whole we can have a whole session on AI generated stuff.
Yeah.
I without getting into it, I dislike the people using the term AI because it's not artificial intelligence. What people are doing,
No,
what's out there. It's not. It's
no,
not intelligent.
no.
It's a very sophisticated algorithm
Yes.
that
It's,
mimics intelligence, but it is not intelligence, artificial or otherwise.
it's mimicry,
Yeah,
and it's reassembling mimicry, and
right. It's large language models. It's
generative AI is theft. It's, yeah, we should get into that sometime.
sometime.
Um,
I wanted to bring up another uh, part of this article that I thought was interesting and that we've talked about. Um, and he points out a crucial pivot happened after World War II as people wrestled with the horrors of the 20th century. Um, Theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, which is interesting that these are Germans that keep coming up in this, argued that recent events had exposed the prevalence of human depravity and the dangers, in particular, of tribalism, nationalism, and collective pride.
uh,
This group wanted to double down on moral formation with a greater emphasis on humility, which is something we talk about a lot.
mhm.
And another group, personified by Carl Rogers, founder of humanistic psychology, focused on the problem of authority. And the trouble with the 20th century, the members of this group argued, was that the existence of rigid power hierarchies led to oppression in many spheres of life. We need to liberate individuals from these authority structures, they contended. People are naturally good and can be trusted to do their own self actualization.
Yeah.
Scott.
Well, I think that I think that people are naturally good in the same way that people are naturally creative, and I think it gets educated out of them. Now, certainly
Okay.
not everybody's naturally good, um, but those are as we said, the exceptions, the aberrations. And people are naturally creative. Children certainly are. Um, and there was a great study where um, they gave they gave a paper clip to a group of 4-year-olds and gave a paper clip to a group of adults and asked them to come up with ideas for what they could do with it. And the adults came up with like 30 ideas, and the children came up with hundreds and hundreds of ideas because they made giant ones and they made them out of, I mean, it was really fascinating. Um, but there's there's certainly it is a question of whether it's a question of philosophy. Are people naturally good? I think that there's a reason that we talk about the virtues. There's a reason codes of virtues came into being because people needed to be educated about those. There's a reason that the Boy Scouts came into being. There's a reason that, and it was to be acceptable to dance and invaluable in a shipwreck. Um, um, I think that collective decision making in a group, which is what it sounds like, get rid of authority structures and everything will be great. Well, collective decision making is slow and inefficient and does not always
Right.
render the best results. The the idea of being there's schools of management from it's a continuum, completely hierarchical, authoritarian, micromanaging to complete hands off. And the balance about there should be a balance between, you're put in charge, you have to take charge. Somebody has to make a decision to move things forward. But if you don't listen to input from other people and you're only making a decision in isolation, they're not going to be well informed. So there's there's a point to having an authority, a structure in things. There's value in that when it's not abused, when
Well,
it works well. When it doesn't work well, you have dictatorship and fascism. Anything can be taken to an extreme and and ruined, therefore. And so I think that's what I have to say about
okay. So let's pull out another thing that I thought jumped out when I was reading this. The uh, the narcissistic personality in modern society has certainly become more uh, visible to us in the United States over the last 10 years or so. And this author draws a distinction between vulnerable narcissists and I don't remember what he called the other. I'm not sure. I've
well,
got it
there's
here.
a kind of malignant narcissism, but
Well, but there some narcissism can drive uh, um, can drive success, right? If you're uh, a vulnerable narcissist, let me quote him: "Vulnerable narcissists are the more common figures in our day," and I think that's a little self-righteous, but people who are also addicted to thinking about themselves, but who often feel anxious, insecure, and avoidant. They are intensely sensitive to rejection. They scan for hints of disrespect. Their self esteem is wildly in flux, and their uncertainty about their inner worth triggers cycles of distrust, shame, and hostility.
hmm,
So, and we kind of see this, I think both sides have a sort of, um, the right wing has a, I'm more conservative than you, therefore I'm winning. And the left has the same kind of a, I'm more woke than you are, and that we talk about that as virtue signaling.
right.
But there's virtue signaling on both sides.
Yeah.
Just the virtues, the perceived virtues differ.
Well, is would you say a reflection of that is the incessant selfie society where people are, and I think we've talked about this before, people will go to see something and they only see it through their screens, their phone
Or they,
screens.
I think that there's an irony to the, I'm going to see this incredible thing, but I'm going to turn my back to it so that
Yeah,
you
and take
can.
or when we were in, it was about 10, 11 years ago, we were in Paris and went to the Louvre Museum. Louvre. I do not have a French accent. Louvre Museum. And the Mona Lisa is there. And I'd actually, when I was a kid, the Mona Lisa came to the United States.
Hmm.
And my parents took us to New York, and I got to see the Mona Lisa in person, very up close, as I recall. Um, and so now the Mona Lisa it's on a wall in this huge gallery. It's on a wall behind plexiglass, and it's not a large painting. And then the area is roped off, so you can only see it at a
Yeah,
distance.
looks like a
And,
postcard.
right. And I walked into the room, and everybody in the room behind this rope is there like this with their phone or their tablet,
Yeah.
holding that up. I thought this is fascinating. So I actually went to the front to the wall that the Mona Lisa is on and turned around and took a picture of everybody holding up their phones and said, "This is the Mona Lisa. This is," and a guard there told me I to stop doing that. I couldn't do that. They could take pictures of the Mona Lisa, but I, for some reason, couldn't take pictures of people taking pictures of the Mona Lisa. It was very weird. But it was the that I'm it's it was fascinating to me. It's either viewing the world through this screen, not actually experiencing it, or as you said, turning your back on it and taking a selfie with it. Um, and I think it's possible that this is a form of connection that people feel. That if they don't have community, they make this community online, this virtual community,
Oh
by
yeah, sure.
connecting with people.
Well, you put
But
up a selfie and you get likes, right?
yes,
That's what it
likes,
is, and that's a validation.
right. Um, yeah,
I,
there's actually an endorphin response
yeah,
to getting likes.
and I've thought of it, and I've coined this term for myself that people are now logging experiences instead of having experiences.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, yeah,
You know, it's more important that I have a record that I did something than to actually remember having done it.
and experience it, fully
Yeah,
experience it.
right.
Yeah,
And I'm sure that I would get shouted down by two generations of people who would say, no, 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 that you don't understand at all. This is how you experience it. This is a way of experiencing it through this medium and blah blah. Okay, whatever, fine.
yeah, and I think as someone who has certainly taken out a sketchbook and sketch things. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is the time. When I'm sketching something, I'm continually interacting with it. I'm observing it in detail. I taught several years ago an adult education drawing class, which was um, a fun experience. And I think the the people who came to it thought it was just going to be, oh, we're just going to get there and draw and have fun. I was charged
No,
with teaching
no,
them.
no fun.
No, I thought it was fun. And by the end, the ones who were left um, thanked me. They said, and one woman particularly said, I did not expect this to be about mindfulness because I was teaching them like how to coordinate their hand and their eye and
Hmm.
notice details of shapes. It's not simply this, it's where does it go in? Where does it go out? How does it vary from the vertical and the horizontal? What angle is it exactly? Can
Yeah,
observing in that you have to really pay attention to what you're seeing. So there's a difference between snapping a picture and drawing a picture. And
I had an
when,
instructor when I was in school who who in almost every other circumstance I did not agree with. But I found this an interesting, it gave me a little, I mean, I just disliked this instructor. So every once in a while you find a instructor who you just
yeah,
don't connect with. He doesn't click. You have opposite ways of viewing things. Um, but at one point, I up on his desk was a sketchbook, and it was like this thick, like a deli sandwich, and it was paper things hanging out of it and loose pages, and you know, and it had been left open to a page, and I was waiting to talk to him, and this book is left open on the page or on his desk, and so while two other people are talking to him, I'm flipping through it, and as they finish their conversations and leave, I looked up and I said, "Do you?" Because there's any random thing you can imagine: buildings, trees, people, dogs, uh, sketches that are obviously out of his imagination. And I said, "Do you draw everything? Do you sketch everything?" And I was being kind of dismissive about how random his drawings were, because some of them were just very loose figure,
mhm.
gesture type drawings. And he shrugged and looked at me and he said, "Not everything. Only when I want to understand something."
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And I forgot what I was going to ask him at that point. I just left because anything I could say after that would be trivial.
yeah. I remember years ago at the Sistine Chapel, seeing the Sistine Chapel, and looking up in it, quite awestruck, and looking at I mean, I'd studied so much of it, and looking at it, and just and standing there, and a group came in, and essentially they were kind of noisy, and they looked up, said, "Okay, seen it, let's go." I mean, that was essentially what they did.
Yeah.
And I've had the experience. Well, we are really far afield from where we started,
Yes, we are.
but um, um, I don't like it when people are rude. Um, but I reserve the right to treat people who have earned it, to treat them as they deserve.
Sure, that's fair.
Yeah.
And there's a whole. If you don't respect the person, you got to respect the office, and that's an old adage.
If the
But
person doesn't respect the office,
right,
yes.
right,
Well,
exactly.
and you were mentioning how um, sayings are often truncated. It reminds me of the one, "My country, right or wrong," is it often is quoted and stopped there, but it's
Right.
"My country, right or wrong," if right, to be kept in the right, and if wrong, to be set right.
Yep.
Yep. So,
And that's kind of what our you spoke earlier just now about um, democracy and the political structures around ethics and how um, we have some effect as a social organism.
mhm,
We can make some investment in our politics, right? And it is ethical, and it is an ethical imperative to do so because it doesn't affect just us. It affects our whole community. It affects our whole nation, whatever. It affects lots of people. Um, and that's another thing that comes out of this article that uh, he has a section called "Politics as a Moral as that is Politics as a Moral Enterprise,"
yes.
and he refers to an ancient brand of amoralism now haunts the world.
Well, I think that's true. And I think it's endemic of or symptomatic of late stage capitalism sometimes, the profit, although there are certainly avaricious people not in capitalist systems who have enriched themselves. Um, I think I think it's also true for people to be absolutely committed to what they believe is a righteous cause and completely misinformed about the basis upon which they're making their judgment. And they're on a crusade, and just like the Crusades, it was,
Rife with atrocities.
yes, exactly. And I see that. I see that around me now. And
And
people
we
are absolutely convinced that they're right, and they are basing they're righteous and misinformed.
right. And I recall a quote by one of my favorite philosophers, Bertrand Russell, who said that I would never stake my life on my beliefs because I might be wrong.
Yeah.
And that's a humility, right?
Yeah.
Because what he's saying is these are just beliefs. This is something I believe. I don't necessarily have any evidence for it. I just believe it to be true. So I'm not going to stake my life on it. I could absolutely be wrong. Um, Going on with this politics as a moral enterprise thing, and we should probably wrap up here, but um, uh, he calls out Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping in particular, embody a kind of amoral realism. Um, they assume the world is a vicious dog eat dog sort of place, and life is a competition to grab what you can.
And then they set out to prove it.
Right, and we see in our politics here, the final quote that I saved here as a note was, "It's fine to elect people," and we see this in practice. It's fine to elect people who lie, who are corrupt, as long as they are ruthless bastards for our side.
Yeah.
And
Well, and it is a question because for somebody to um, gain higher office in politics, there has to be a certain amount of drive there. Can they achieve that position without being something of a shark? And if so, if everybody there is a shark, is it better to have our sharks on our side be bigger than the sharks on the other side? And
I think that's something we've been sold, frankly,
yeah, I agree. I
that
agree.
that the only way to get office in this country is to make unsavory deals and compromise your ethics and play the game. I want to reject that. I would like to see somebody come along that does.
When Robert Kennedy was running for the presidential nomination, when he was attorney general, he became senator, then he was running for presidential nomination before he was sadly assassinated. He probably would have gotten the nomination and would have beat the pants off Nixon too. Um, Nixon might not have gotten the nomination, might have gone to Nelson Rockefeller, but speculative history. But one of the charges leveled against Robert Kennedy was that he was ruthless.
Yeah.
And that was somehow that was a negative. It was potentially viewed as disqualifying.
Compared to Nixon, he was ruthless.
Compared to Nixon. compared to Lyndon Johnson, who had been the Speaker of the House and used everything he knew about everybody to actually accomplish some good things. But yes, I don't think that it's necessary for someone to be a bad guy to accomplish good things.
Well, and I hope it's not, the only, we're in a very sad state when that's the person we're looking to elect because we expect them to have. I'll backtrack a little bit, and then I've resigned myself. I've come to expect a certain amount in this country of sort of low-level casual graft in government. I think there's a certain amount of baksheesh, greases the wheels and get things done. It's when it becomes so self-serving.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes it's like, I need to get this done. You can do it. I'm going to give it to you because I know you and I trust you.
Yeah.
And you're going to kick back to me because, you're my brother-in-law or whatever. That kind of thing I think has always
been. Well, I think what used to happen was more horse trading in the sense of I'll support your bill to do this thing if you support my bill, which brings, stuff to my district. And I think there was a certain amount of that. But it never, I mean, there were probably examples, but the idea that a Supreme Justice of the Supreme Court would accept gifts and trips and all sorts of stuff without reporting it even, and people would look the other way is astonishing. It's things have gotten so far afield. So I think getting back to the premise of the question. Are people meaner? Well, I don't think so, but if they are, they certainly have examples at the top that says it's okay to do
Well,
whatever. If you can get away with it, it's acceptable. If you're not caught, it's okay. That's terrible.
well, yeah, right. Well, and I wonder if we spoke about this just before we started recording. Whether the world or this country or whatever has gotten meaner, I think we have been forced into a higher, greater level of cynicism
Yeah,
than ever before
yeah,
in this country, at least. And um, whether or not we can ever reclaim a sort of ethical high ground anymore, I think that we have to at least recognize that we're we've we're off the rails somewhere. Somewhere we've gone. We've lost track of what we were supposed to be doing with this democracy thing. I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know what it would ever take. At this point, we've got so much legislation that encourages corruption. Frankly, in many ways, I mean, we are never going to find a congressperson to run on dismantling Citizens United. How can they?
yeah.
Because their unethical opponents are going to take that money.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
how are we ever going to undo Project Red Map when both sides are using gerrymandering to achieve their goals?
yeah.
You know, how do we re how do we
You are bumming
refinance?
me out, dude.
How are we going to refinance education when privatization puts money in people's pockets?
Yeah,
How, I don't know. I don't know.
yeah,
Give me an ethical candidate and I'll vote for him. That's all. Them. He, she, doesn't matter.
yeah.
Okay. Well, on that
Yeah.
happy
Wow.
note.
Wow. Yeah, I need some of that high proof
cast,
bourbon.
cast strength, buddy.
Yeah.
Let's
Wow.
loosen my tongue a little bit, maybe. I mean to bum you out.
Yeah.
But if we wake up one person in our audience,
Yeah.
we've served some purpose with all of this.
Okay.
So it's on you now.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay. So please share,
For
please.
whatever good it'll do.
um, and until next time, if there is a next time,
We don't just go step off a bridge somewhere.
um, be thou a good knight. Oh,
That's
sorry.
right.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Be thou
A good night.
and true.